Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal the sudden collapse of Maxie became the epicenter of shockwaves that rippled through not only the media in Port Charles but also every corner of the community. What was meant to be an ordinary recording session for the Home and Heart program, where Maxie appeared with her trademark confidence and charm, turned into a nightmare in an instant. One moment she was radiant beneath the studio lights, and the next she lost her balance and crumpled to the ground before stunned co-stars and horrified crew members. Screams filled the air as panic took hold. Cameras quickly cut away, lights dimmed, and paramedics rushed to the stage in a desperate attempt to save her. For Maxie, who carried the lifelong shadow of a childhood heart transplant, any medical emergency was a ticking time bomb. But this time, the situation carried with it a sinister complexity that hinted at something far more than a failing heart. At General Hospital, the situation escalated into a frantic battle between life and death. Dr. Lucas Jones and Elizabeth Weber worked in perfect synchronization, fighting to coax Maxie's heart back into rhythm. Their efforts paid off when her heartbeat returned, weak but steady, pulling her back from the brink of death. Relief swept through the medical staff, but it was short-lived. Despite stable vital signs, Maxie remained unresponsive, her body still as though locked in some invisible struggle. The tests that followed only deepened the mystery. Buried in her blood work was the trace of an unusual enzyme, an anomaly without a clear origin, but with devastating consequences. The enzyme appeared to act as a catalyst, destabilizing cardiac function and triggering the sudden collapse. For the doctors, this was not a simple case of organ rejection or natural failure. For the investigators watching closely, it was the spark of something far more terrifying, deliberate poisoning. Anna Devane was the first to connect the dots. With her seasoned instincts and history of tracking threats that lurk in the shadows of Port Charles, she recognized the hallmarks of foul play. Maxie was no stranger to danger, but this timing was too precise, too calculated. Recently, Maxie had positioned herself at the center of a controversy that could expose powerful figures. She had voiced her intention to report the questionable source of Sonny Corinthos' financial investment in deception, suspecting it had ties to criminal activity rather than legitimate funds. While the other board members had voted against going to the authorities, Maxie stood firm in her commitment to transparency. In doing so, she made herself a target. For some, her principles marked her as a liability, and liabilities in Port Charles often meet dangerous ends. Among those with the most motive was Jens Sidwell. His reputation was already stained with whispers of corruption and manipulation, and as Maxie's determination grew louder, so too did the speculation surrounding Sidwell's role in silencing her. Rumors spread rapidly through back channels that he had tampered with her personal cosmetics, specifically her daily facial cream. What seemed harmless and routine could easily have been transformed into the perfect delivery system for toxins, infiltrating her bloodstream unnoticed over time. Such a theory painted Sidwell not merely as a businessman with something to protect but as a calculating predator willing to exploit even the most intimate aspects of Maxie's life to neutralize her. Amid this storm of uncertainty and fear came the unexpected return of Lulu Spencer. After 4 long years in a coma, Lulu's awakening had already felt like a miracle, but her re-entry into life was abruptly shadowed by tragedy. Barely reacquainted with her new reality, she was forced to watch as her closest friend lay unconscious in a hospital bed, fighting for her life. Memories surged back of how Maxie had never once abandoned her, faithfully sitting by her bedside, whispering encouragement, and refusing to let hope die. Lulu now felt the weight of that loyalty pressing heavily on her heart. Maxie had carried her through years of silence, now it was Lulu's turn to fight for Maxie when she could not fight for herself. Driven by both gratitude and instinct, Lulu embraced her role not only as a friend but as a relentless investigator. She drew upon the sharp instincts she had honed as a journalist, piecing together the fragments of suspicion left in the wake of Maxie's collapse. Every detail seemed vital, every anomaly a clue. She combed through Maxie's belongings, scrutinized her routines, and questioned the circumstances leading up to that fateful taping. In every shadow she searched for answers, and with every step, she was pulled deeper into a web of secrets. What made Lulu's pursuit even more harrowing was the sense that time was running out. The enzyme in Maxie's system was not something the doctors could easily neutralize, and while her body clung to life, the risk of permanent damage grew by the hour. Lulu recognized that uncovering the truth might not only bring justice but also reveal the key to saving Maxie before it was too late. Yet, the deeper she went, the clearer it became that powerful figures were invested in keeping the truth buried. With every lead she followed, threats grew more menacing, and her own safety became increasingly precarious. The collapse of Maxie had begun as a medical emergency. But in Port Charles, nothing ever remained so simple. It had transformed into a scandal, an investigation, and perhaps the spark of a war between those desperate to preserve their power and those brave enough to expose it. And at the very center of this battle stood Lulu Spencer, newly awakened, indebted to her friend, and determined to drag the truth into the light, no matter how dangerous the path ahead would become. Lulu's instincts as both a journalist and a survivor sharpened quickly as she began to comb through the details surrounding Maxie's collapse. What initially appeared to be a medical mystery began to unravel into a labyrinth of suspicious signs that pointed directly toward foul play. In Maxie's dressing room at home and heart, Lulu noticed that several bottles of cosmetics and skincare products had been subtly altered. The packaging bore faint scratches, evidence of tampering. One jar had its seal broken and resealed so carefully that only a meticulous eye would have detected the manipulation. These details alone would have raised alarm, but a technician from the show went further, quietly admitting to Lulu that an unfamiliar figure had been seen lurking backstage on the morning of the broadcast. The description did not match anyone from the production crew, and no guest list accounted for their presence. As Lulu pressed deeper, her investigation led her into the digital world of Maxie's professional connections. She uncovered a string of emails, cryptic, vague, yet unmistakably connected to Jen Sidwell. The correspondence suggested more than simple intimidation. They revealed an effort to buy influence, with Sidwell offering favors and payments to someone embedded within the home and heart crew. The aim seemed clear: orchestrate a setup that would compromise Maxie's safety and credibility. Yet questions multiplied as quickly as answers. Was Sidwell acting alone, driven solely by his need to silence Maxie's threat to Deception's financial dealings? Or was he merely the visible arm of a larger conspiracy with partners hidden in the shadows, waiting for their moment to surface? Anna Devane, ever vigilant, tracked Lulu's progress with a mixture of concern and admiration. She knew the young woman's determination mirrored her own but also understood that every clue uncovered placed Lulu in deeper peril. Anna began reconstructing the timeline, focusing especially on the mysterious enzyme discovered in Maxie's blood work. Its properties were chillingly precise. It did not resemble a common poison but rather a compound engineered to strike at the vulnerabilities of a transplanted heart. Anna could not shake the thought that this was not the work of an amateur, but of someone with access to sophisticated medical knowledge. Her mind drifted to cases from the past, illegal biomedical experiments and covert projects, some with international ties. If Maxie was being used as an unwitting test subject, then Port Charles was no longer dealing with a localized crime, it was staring down the opening moves of a global conspiracy. Jason Morgan remained in the background, silent yet watchful. His loyalty to Sonny compelled him to consider the broader implications. If Maxie's collapse became tied directly to Sonny's illicit funds within Deception, then the entire Corinthos operation could crumble. Jason saw the danger in Lulu's reckless bravery, and though he admired her courage, he feared for her life. He began quietly compiling his own evidence, gathering intelligence on Sidwell's movements, and placing discreet protection around Lulu. He knew too well how easily an investigation like hers could turn into a death sentence, and his instincts told him that Lulu had already been marked. The tangled web thickened further with the arrival of Drew. His presence complicated everything. Outwardly, he expressed concern for Maxie, but beneath the surface, Drew's motives gleamed with opportunism. He recognized that information was power, and the chaos surrounding Maxie's condition presented him with leverage. He maneuvered carefully, reaching out to certain players, dropping hints, positioning himself as the man who could manage the fallout. To Lulu, it became obvious that Drew was playing a dangerous game, not aligned with justice or friendship but with ambition. Each calculated move he made added turbulence to an already volatile storm, and Lulu began to wonder if Drew was attempting to weaponize Maxie's tragedy for his own ascent in Port Charles's hierarchy of power. Meanwhile, Liesl Albrecht's theory shook even the most hardened minds. With her background in experimental medicine, she proposed that the enzyme was not a simple toxin but the product of unlawful medical research. Such a substance would not only destabilize Maxie's transplanted heart but could also serve as a template for future biochemical weapons or medical extortion schemes. To Albrecht, Maxie was not merely poisoned, she was selected. The thought sent a chill through Lulu and Anna alike. If this was true, Sidwell might be only a pawn, his hands dirty but his influence limited. The real threat could lie far beyond the city's borders, in the hands of organizations that saw human lives as nothing more than tools for experimentation. The deeper Lulu pushed, the more perilous her own world became. A dark sedan trailed her one night, headlights glaring in her rearview mirror until it finally peeled away into the shadows. Anonymous calls began to plague her phone, each one bearing the same chilling message: "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Then came the envelope, slid beneath her door, its contents designed to terrify. Inside were surveillance photographs of Maxie, unconscious in her hospital bed, alongside pictures of her children at school and in the park. The message was undeniable. Whoever orchestrated this conspiracy had resources, reach, and no hesitation to target the innocent. Lulu was no longer simply chasing a story, she was at war with an enemy who understood the stakes far too well. Outside the hospital, the atmosphere in Port Charles thickened with rumor and dread. The whispers spread quickly, that a shadowy force was manipulating events, that Maxie's collapse was not an accident, that Port Charles itself had become the stage for a much larger and more dangerous drama. Reporters descended, their headlines feeding the frenzy. The citizens speculated about Sidwell's role, Sonny's involvement, and the possibility of medical conspiracies beyond their comprehension. For many, it felt as if the familiar balance of their community was slipping, replaced by paranoia and mistrust. Through it all, Lulu refused to falter. She understood the risks, but the memory of Maxie's loyalty during her own coma years gave her strength. For Lulu, this investigation was not optional, it was a debt she owed to her best friend. Even as the threats escalated and allies grew wary, she pressed forward with determination that bordered on obsession. Each lead was a step closer to exposing the truth, and each discovery bound her more tightly to the fate of her friend. What began as a single collapse on live television had evolved into a storm of political intrigue, financial corruption, and personal vendettas. Old relationships resurfaced, old grudges reignited, and hidden enemies emerged from the shadows. In Port Charles, where the line between loyalty and betrayal has always been perilously thin, Maxie's suffering became the spark that set everything ablaze. Now, as the city braced for the fallout, all eyes turned to Lulu. Newly awakened, fiercely driven, and standing at the edge of a revelation that could either save her friend or destroy them both. Jason Morgan had always lived in the shadows, operating in the murky gray areas of Port Charles where loyalty was tested and betrayal was expected. But this time, the danger he sensed went beyond the usual threats that circled Sonny Corinthos' empire. As soon as Maxie collapsed, Jason recognized that this wasn't simply about her health, it was about information, money, and power. Maxie's determination to expose the questionable funds Sonny had funneled into deception had put a spotlight on something that was never meant to see daylight. If those numbers, transfers, and connections came to light, it wouldn't just be Sonny whose reputation and safety were destroyed. The ripple effect would shake the foundation of his entire network, and Jason knew the enemies that Sonny had made over decades would seize the opportunity to strike. That knowledge forced Jason into a delicate balancing act. On one hand, Maxie had to be protected, kept alive long enough to uncover what was truly happening. On the other, Lulu, newly awakened from her years-long coma, was already plunging headfirst into the investigation with the kind of recklessness that mirrored her mother's fire and her father's stubbornness. Jason respected her drive but feared that her lack of restraint would get her killed. Without hesitation, he deployed men to quietly follow her, to watch her every move without her knowing. It was the only way he could ensure she didn't walk blindly into a trap designed to silence her forever. Where Jason saw danger to contain, Drew saw opportunity to exploit. Drew Kane, long struggling to carve out a position of power in Port Charles, treated Maxie's collapse not as a tragedy but as a pivotal opening. He recognized the chaos circling deception, the whispers about Sonny's investments, and the vacuum of leadership that panic inevitably created. To Drew, information was leverage, and he was determined to gather every piece of intelligence he could, twisting it into a weapon. The difference between Jason and Drew was stark. Jason acted to protect his family's empire and those caught in the crossfire. Drew acted to advance himself, seeing Maxie not as a victim but as a bargaining chip in a game of power. Lulu noticed the shift immediately, saw the cold calculation in Drew's moves, and her instincts told her that his ambitions made him just as dangerous as those who poisoned Maxie. She vowed to confront him, even if she lacked the strength and resources to withstand his manipulations. Then there was Liesl Albrecht. Always brilliant, always sinister in her reasoning, Albrecht unsettled the hospital staff with a theory that turned everyone's stomach. The enzyme in Maxie's blood, she argued, bore the fingerprints not of accidental poisoning but of advanced biomedical engineering. It had properties far too specific, too refined, to have been stumbled upon by coincidence. To Albrecht, this was evidence of experimentation. Someone was testing the boundaries of science with human lives. Maxie, in Albrecht's chilling hypothesis, was not merely silenced but transformed into a living experiment, her transplanted heart the perfect test subject for a compound designed to destabilize human biology. The implication was horrifying. Maxie's suffering wasn't just personal, it was symptomatic of a much larger operation, one that could extend far beyond Port Charles. The revelation fueled paranoia across the city. Whispers spread in cafes, in alleyways, in hospital waiting rooms. Some insisted Sidwell was the mastermind, his greed and desperation driving him to tamper with Maxie's life. Others suggested that Sidwell himself was too small a figure, merely a pawn being used by powers far greater. The most scandalous rumors accused Sonny himself of orchestrating the poisoning, not to kill Maxie, but to frame someone else or to manipulate the outcome of her revelations. Carly Spencer seethed at the gossip. She had her differences with Sonny, their past filled with battles and reconciliations, but the thought of Maxie being reduced to collateral damage infuriated her. Carly launched her own quiet investigation, prying into Deception's accounts, pressuring Sonny to come clean, demanding that he stop hiding behind vague denials. Her defiance only fractured the Corinthos circle further, sowing discord within a family that thrived on projecting unity. While others maneuvered, Damian Spinelli refused to stand idle. His devotion to Maxie was unshakable, and unlike the rest, his weapon was not physical power or political influence, but code. He dived into Sidwell's digital world, slicing through encrypted servers and shadow networks. What he unearthed went beyond anything he had expected. Yes, Sidwell's fingerprints were all over illicit transfers, hidden accounts, and black market dealings. But buried deeper was something far more disturbing, a list of names linked to a clandestine biomedical project. The names weren't just faceless scientists and financiers. Among them were individuals connected to the Corinthos organization itself, people once thought of as allies. Spinelli was rattled. The discovery shattered his assumptions and revealed that this was no longer a story of one man's corruption but part of an expansive conspiracy that blurred the lines between family, business, and betrayal. The threats grew sharper as Lulu pushed forward. She received a manila envelope slipped under her door. Inside were photographs that made her blood run cold. Maxie, lying helpless in her hospital bed, tubes and monitors tethering her to life. Maxie's children, captured at school, at play in the park, unaware they were being watched through a predator's lens. The message was clear: stop now, or innocence would pay the price. Lulu's hands trembled, but her resolve hardened. Fear was what her enemies wanted, and fear was what she refused to give them. She pressed on, cross-referencing Spinelli's digital findings with her own legwork, interviewing technicians, tracking shipments, unraveling connections that stretched far beyond the walls of General Hospital. What she began to piece together was terrifying. Port Charles was not the beginning and end of this conspiracy. It was merely a testing ground, a small stage upon which a global network rehearsed its methods. Financial corruption, medical exploitation, political manipulation, they were all threads in the same web. Sidwell was a face, Sonny's money was a vehicle, Drew's ambition was a tool, but the puppeteers pulling the strings remained hidden, faceless, patient. And Maxie, lying silent and unresponsive, was their unwitting sacrifice. The city teetered on the edge of chaos. Every conversation dripped with suspicion. Every glance carried doubt.